Hello, a very warm welcome to all of you to this afternoon's virtual fireside chat. Today's event is the final conversation in the Global Innovation Forum Summer What's Next webinar series. That's hashtag What's Next, which is about tapping into the knowledge of a broad innovation community and focusing on opportunities for positive change during the current pandemic. Many of you may already be familiar with the Global Innovation Forum, an innovation journey that began for the organising team 10 years ago this year. It's an exciting milestone. Initially a pilot conference event, it really has grown far beyond the boundaries of an event into a community of like-minded innovators, many from different backgrounds, different industries and market sectors, united by a common challenge of sharing inspirational perspectives, cross-fertilizing ideas and experiences to solve human challenges and make the world a better place. My name is Ben Strutt. I'm Director of Design and Front-End Innovation at Cambridge Design Partnership. We're a global insights, research, design and technology development partner working on new devices and technologies for the consumer, healthcare and automotive sectors, with offices in Cambridge, UK and Raleigh, North Carolina on the US East Coast. Before I introduce today's inspirational guest, I'm pleased to confirm that we will also be joined live by Pete, an illustrator from company Live Illustration, who, as the name suggests, will be sketching our conversation in real time.
Hello everyone, hi.
The team from Live Illustration are now core attractions of the annual November conference, routinely producing an illustrated record of the two-day event that covers more than 10 square meters of paper. I'll be video spotlighting his progress from time to time through the conversation. As we are all painfully aware, we are living in a time of unprecedented change at the moment, and history shows that periods like this often witness significant technology and behavioural shifts compressed into very short spaces of time. It's therefore a privilege to be hosting someone who, like many pioneering designers, has been creating the future for quite some time. Today's webinar guest, acclaimed auto designer Frank Stephenson. Many of you will already be familiar with Frank's work and influence, most likely directly through the discipline of design and design thought leadership. But if not directly, then most definitely indirectly through simply having lived and travelled on many of the world's highways. Frank studied automotive design at the renowned Art Center College of Design in Pasadena, has been the director of design for Mini, Ferrari, Maserati, Fiat, Lancia, Alfa Romeo and McLaren. His pen touching many of the most familiar and desirable cars of the last 3 decades. More recently, he's been working through Frank Stephenson Design on partnerships ranging from Lilium Aviation, a pioneering eVTOL flying taxi company, to breakthrough baby car seat company, Baby Ark. Frank, good afternoon.
Hello, Ben. Very happy to be here.
Brilliant. I'm delighted to be here. I genuinely considered having this conversation sat in my car, actually, this sort of virtual car share. It's funny, in some ways I really genuinely miss driving, and other ways I haven't missed it at all. I mean, I've probably driven less than 50 miles in the last 3 months, and it's strange to think about the many ways, large and small, our lives and our habits and our routines have changed. I mean, they often say that time gets compressed in terms of innovation progress during periods of crisis. How do you think our relationship with the car, our car experience will change as a result of this crisis? Is there going to be an ongoing legacy, or is it going to go back to normal?
Well, that's a great question to start out with, Ben. First of all, I think just to go back a little, I think we're all really noticing the shrinking, I guess you could call it, of our daily circle of movement. You know, typically we don't think twice about just hopping in the car and going, you know, anywhere, be it to the closest town or you know, anywhere you want to travel that gets you, you know, typically a little bit further than walking. We don't really think twice about it. We haven't thought twice about it. Now, it's amazing to feel like we're back in the, probably even more like the 1700s or even earlier than that. I mean, you know, as we moved into periods where you had other forms other than cars to travel, you started, you know, expanding your distances, your daily distances. With the car, I mean, a day's drive was kind of normal. Now, most of us haven't probably moved more than, I don't know, 50 miles away from where we live at the most, probably. And you start to notice that you can still live without your vehicle and you can still enjoy life. And of course, a lot of us do enjoy, you know, traveling and just the act of traveling itself, you know, getting from one place to the other can be fun. It's not all about the destination. But I think as soon as we get out of this crisis we're facing at the moment, not only will things pick up again, obviously, but we'll be looking at the results of what we've gone through as a stimulus or as an opportunity to maybe move forward in the world of transportation in a way that perhaps avoids possible social contact the way we've always had it on the tubes or the subways or in trains, planes, things like that, in a way that not to anti-socialize humans, but to actually protect ourselves in the terms of safety. Because in design, I think one of the top priorities in design as a responsibility for a designer is to consider safety. So safety doesn't just mean, if there's an accident or preventing an accident, it involves everything around yourself, around the product, around your actual engagement with the product and things. So the fact that we'll have to realize that there is a need to almost make sure that the form of travel is healthy is going to be a new responsibility, a new thing that we as designers are going to have to tackle. So there's a lot of opportunity, a lot of things coming for us in the future that as designers we probably haven't faced, in the past, or not that we haven't faced it, we haven't really actually considered it. So,
and staying with that sort of theme of transport being healthy, I mean, we all under normal circumstances travel a lot nationally and internationally. I mean, we last met in March and you were about to head off on a trip to the US. I guess that didn't happen. The world went into lockdown, but I can imagine that the public transport is going to change as well. I mean, how are interiors, how are onboard systems going to change? There's going to be a lot of scrutiny of these things, I guess, over the coming months and years. In the very short term, what sort of innovations can we expect to see in public transport interiors and systems?
Yeah, whether or not public transport picks up again like it used to is still questionable. I don't think any of us really know for certain the answer, because there are going to be a lot of people who just throw care to the wind and say, okay, I'm wearing a mask, that's enough for me to feel safe and protected. Whereas the other extreme will be people who still, who have used public transport in the past, but will absolutely refuse, no matter what anybody tells them, to get on the public transport system again. So there'll probably be, I don't know the percentage, but a huge reduction in the amount of people who actually do use public transport, which will be interesting. I mean, those people who aren't using it will have to find other ways to get to their destinations. But in terms of public transport, I can see, and I hope it doesn't happen, but suddenly when we had the concerns over terrorists and on airplanes where we had to suddenly all start taking our shoes off and going through very long, relatively long check-ins and processes to get onto a plane, that might start to happen in terms of checking temperatures before you get onto any public transport. As long as these processes are sped up in efficiency, it probably won't hurt travel too much. It's when it starts causing delays that is actually the problem, because people are very concerned about getting from A to B as quickly as possible. They don't want that everyday journey to take longer than it needs to take. And if you're starting to implement obstacles to making that as smooth as possible, then you're going to have probably a very frustrated amount of people that are trying to take these public transport systems. So I think for one thing, UI, user experience type designers will start coming into more usage, I guess, or more interesting ways for them to see how they can efficiently get people happily, also not just efficiently, but happily on and off and on their journeys. Physically, I think designs are going to start changing in a little way that you won't probably be, I mean, you look at Japan and the Far East, how they just they have people employed to ram people onto the trains and pack them in like sardines. I seriously doubt we'll be back to that type of transport, at least until there's the vaccine is out there that can be trusted and depended on. But to actually have people being packed into very tight spaces in a good way, that's going to happen. That's going to reflect the age that we're going through right now in this crisis. So you probably won't have to worry too much about being, jammed up against other people. That can only be seen as a positive advancement. In terms of seeding and things like that, it's going to be interesting because you're still in the same area, you're still sharing the same air. So I can imagine some type of ventilation systems designs are going to start becoming more in use in terms of being able to filter out whatever's in the air that could cause you perhaps to catch any viruses or things. So there'll be a lot of not just offset spacing. That's very easy to do. Obviously, you just remove a seat or you sort of stagger the seating, so you can do that. That's just easy design. But I think it has to go much deeper than that in the way that people don't feel dangerous. You don't want to go into a dangerous situation, kind of like miners, way back that had to, say goodbye to their wives and children and hope they returned at night. They'd go down in this deep, dark hole and they'd be underneath ground knowing that it's a dangerous situation, but they were forced to do it, and they had to wear whatever protective gear they had, which wasn't enough, actually. But that's kind of the feeling you want to avoid when you're designing public transport. You don't want people feeling like they're going into a dangerous zone that can physically or mentally hurt them. I mean, you're going to work to do a great job, perhaps, and put out your best. And the last thing you want to do is be stressed on the way to work or stressed on the way to home. So you have to find, we as industrial designers will have to find a way to safely, and we have this hurdle in front of us that it's coming at us. We are going to have to face getting a solution for this, because it's not easy, I imagine, to convince people's thoughts that it's not as dangerous as they might think it is. So
yeah, it's interesting you touch on that point, and seating arrangements and people flows, and maybe we'll see more different design disciplines playing a much bigger role in transportation in the future. You talked about user experience designers, and I also feel a sort of duty as a designer not only to kind of create those solutions, but actually, as you've just said, to give people the emotional reassurance that they're going to be safe, that it's going to be okay, they should carry on.
Yeah, that's design for you. I know, a lot of people mix designers up with artists or stylists, but I think the real designers have to be slightly leaning towards the engineering side slightly. As a designer, you're not just drawing a pretty picture of what could be a pretty situation with flowers on the wall and beautiful bright colors in the interior. You actually have to go deeper than that to really get into the psyche and obviously the engineering values of making something work efficiently.
So picking up on those themes, I mean, you're a big advocate of this blending of sort of art and science and nature, and I mean, maybe you could talk a bit more about those philosophies and how they influence your work, but actually also maybe how we could harness some of the learning points in a situation like this.
Sure. I mean, as designers, we're trying to look for the next new thing to create the wow factor when you see something for the first time. And it's not hard to create the wow factor. What's hard is to create the wow factor and make it desirable and attractive. Create something new is the easiest thing to do. It's just, a little bit of creativity will get you there. But the fact is that I think as design, we have a responsibility to go into it so deep that it not only just looks better, but actually brings a huge advantage to what we're working on, to the market. So oftentimes we look at industrial products as being industrially designed, and that is the solution. But if you look long term, what we have, which is so special about the planet Earth, is nature. We can, as humans, can create a lot of things in life, mechanically or electronically, but the beauty of the world really lies within nature. I think, you can create an industrial object and it'll be great for a couple of years, and then something else will come along and replace it and be even better than that. But that really isn't soul satisfying, as I like to say. It doesn't really touch you. It can be an emotionally designed product, but the real emotion comes from, we spoke about our five senses of falling in love with something. It takes all those five senses to thoroughly fall in love with something, and we can find those touch points of those five senses are definitely instilled in nature. And if we can bring sort of make our lives more natural, I'm not trying to be a tree hugger here, although the environment obviously is one of the most important things we have to consider. But if we can sort of start steering the direction of future design towards simpler and happier designs, not aggressive and shocking just to be bold and to make a statement. I think that's the wrong direction that we go in and design a lot of times, is we create something that has a shock value to it, but your inner senses actually repel it, and through getting used to seeing it, you start to get used to it and accustomed to it. And we fall for that as being, okay, it's not bad design. It is bad design if you don't really feel attracted to it in the first instant. Anything that repels you, your body repels it for a certain reason. It's either uncomfortable to look at, it scares you, it doesn't warm to you. So that is, in general, I think the design direction that if we want to better society and to make it more peaceful, not so aggressive, obviously, and just a generally happier society, we have to look at nature as the big influencer in terms of the way they find the same solutions to the problems that we have. I mean, nature faces every kind of problem. Look at overpopulation, things like this are happening, not to control overpopulation, but as a result of a virus like this, we're rethinking every position we've reached in society today is being rethought, all the way from economics and government, education, every facet of society is being influenced by what nature has actually brought to us in a way that we consider it terrible. Obviously, it's not, this type of pandemic is awful, but in a certain other way, it's a stimulus for us to look for another way to improve society. And again, we were speaking about it last time we spoke, Ben, about this is actually an opportunity to find better ways to live, better ways to create things that improve society. So it's not like we should turn our backs on it and run away from it and hope it never happens again. It's actually an opportunity to know that it will probably happen again. It's not the first and last time, but in terms of making ourselves more prepared or avoiding the possibilities of things hurting us, I think it's a great opportunity for us to mentalize ourselves in terms of how to live better or more in tune with nature,
And thinking of that idea of living more in tune, I mean, we've all seen the headlines of photographs from space, seeing bits of the Earth that just haven't been seen for several decades because of the pollution and so on.
Yeah,
And that's probably because we aren't traveling so much. I think that's fair to say. I mean, like many of us, you've probably been forced to work from home over the last few months. I mean, some people aren't as fortunate maybe, but thinking about some of your own routines, your own itinerary, you're a global traveler. How has being at home, what sort of systems, what processes have you created to enable you to carry on doing the things you do? And where has it worked? Where has it not worked? What are your reflections?
Well, it's definitely been an eye-opener in the sense that it feels like I'm busier than ever. I mean, I have to be, those of us who can say we're busier than ever, that's actually a positive thing. But the fact is, the world doesn't slow down at all. I mean, in this situation we find ourselves in, it's giving corporations, it's giving companies, everybody time to start to mull over or think about the possibility of how can we improve the company, what new strategies can we put in place, what new projects can come about that actually help the company. So there's been enough free time for companies to start to find out that even though it seems on the outside that we've actually slowed down, it's actually inside. The engine is still revving, and you see it's like a parked car with the engine warming up and revving and ready to get going, kind of thing. The car might look stationary, but it's waiting to get put into first gear when we come out of this. So yeah, I think what I've noticed is the travel situation that I used to do. For example, I was traveling weekly, 2 times a week from England to Europe for at least a year and a half. And at the beginning, you feel like, wow, this is pretty cool. I'm a jet setter, you know. I live on a plane almost and in a hotel. But after a while, you start realizing I'm sicker more often than I've ever been. You'll come back with that sluggish flu-like or colds or feeling, and basically your output is affected by that. You know, you get all this traveling that needs to be done. We've always thought it needed to be done, and obviously in the modern age, most of us experience flight travel as something normal for our jobs. But the fact is, I find myself being, you know, a certain factor more productive than I've ever been in my life, simply because staying at home, you know, you have to enjoy it being at home, obviously, but if you have that comfort that you can enjoy being at home, then it actually makes you more productive in the sense that you've reduced your travel stress. Most of us getting from here to work, it's not fun. It's, you know, most of us don't really enjoy that get up and go feeling in the morning, where you have to get to work by a certain time and you have all your meetings scheduled and you meet somebody on the way to work on, you know, on the highway that upsets you. You already arrive at work in a bad mood. And so it kind of runs that kind of feeling throughout the day. Whereas if you're more relaxed, at least in the creative professions, your creativity levels go up by a high amount. I mean, noticeably high amount. And you're still synced with your colleagues. You still have we have obviously Skype and Zoom and whatever other methods we need to stay in touch, but you know, transferring of data and things like that can still happen, even if we're not 5 feet away from the other members in the studio. And so as long as those continue to improve, Skype and Zoom still, for some people, you know, it works and it doesn't work sometimes, but at the same time, I can imagine them looking, I was just thinking about this morning, what will Zoom and Skype be looking to do to make their systems even better, you know, than what we have at the moment? I don't know. Not too much thought, but you can imagine Zoom 5 years from now won't be like Zoom today. It'll be even probably, you know, holographic perhaps or something. So you're actually sitting in a room, in your own room, and you have holographic images of people with you. So you almost have that social contact with them. It's doable. It's obviously doable.
It feels like this sort of recurrent theme of the pace of change just accelerating at times like this. Frank, before I go to my next question, I can see that Peter's been busy in the background, and I'd love to check in with him and see how the live illustration is going. Pete, can you share your screen and tell us a bit about the themes that have come out over the last few minutes for you?
Okay, so obviously I've been busy drawing, so I'll try and collect my thoughts out loud, so bear with me. I got this idea that safety will be prioritised in the future as we move forward, and this notion with, I've got lots of little UX designers here examining the public transport systems, and then this designer here on the sort of top right of the canvas, just by the airport, he's thinking of the 5 senses in nature and how best to streamline those journeys and make them feel safe. Yes.
Amazing, Pete. Thank you, Frank. I think our work is done here.
Peter, you're hired. Whatever.
Thank you.
That's amazing. I mean, I've seen that done once, and I wondered how it was like some kind of trick because it was in real time. And I was thinking, how does this work? It's like a card trick that you don't understand how it actually works in real time. But you're doing amazing. I mean, that is awesome. That is so good. You must be so, I mean, talented to be able to, I'm not trying to.
Oh, well, thank you very much.
The ability to think and to illustrate so
okay,
well.
guys, break it up.
Yeah.
It's amazing. We get it.
Get a room.
Frank, now I've been changing tack slightly. I think you're based out of London now, live and based out of London, but you were born in Casablanca. Your mother was Spanish, your father of Norwegian descent. You lived in Istanbul and Madrid as you grew up. You speak 4 languages. How does such a deeply embedded multicultural perspective, probably from as early as you remember, prepare you for design and maybe even reflecting on the current situation, for the unexpected?
Well, yeah, I often ask, how do you become a designer? I don't think anybody really, if you get a good track record behind you, in other words, if you can get to a level where people think you've got a bit of success behind you, those people I've noticed tend to not really, they're a little bit different. If that, you know, they're not your normal person. They kind of have grown up being designers from the earliest age on. And I wouldn't say there's actually a point where you sort of, in your life, if you're a designer, become a designer. I think you kind of have to grow up in some kind of atmosphere that wires you or forms you to be able to think in this kind of very broad sense of the world, of living situations, cultures, languages, all that, that you have to, that has to almost seem normal to you in a certain way. So I think it's hard for a designer, you know, to grow up in a single town in the middle of nowhere, you know, small town, and then suddenly flourish and become a designer, because he hasn't really had that kind of bombardment or influences from so many different viewpoints, you know, and the fact that you can have this 360-degree exposure to the world in terms of languages, customs, arts, culture, anything like that, music, everything sort of starts to make your mind ping in different directions instead of one focused direction. So you grow up in that kind of atmosphere. I know I've grown up being very unprejudiced, or very, very open to new things and very accepting of different thoughts. And so it's a nice way to grow up, I would imagine, because looking back, I'm very, very thankful that I got this kind of wide exposure as a child, and it definitely made me start seeing the world in color at a very young age, I guess. So I've always had this kind of tendency to think like a designer. What if? Question a lot. Why? How come? You know, and can it be different? And why is it like that? So all this kind of questioning feelings I grew up with evolved into one basic ingredient that is very important for designers to have, which is that basic element of curiosity. So companies are always asking, how do we make our people more creative, or our workforce more creative? You know, creativity is not a switch. You can't turn it on and say, okay, now everybody be creative. Go into that room and brainstorm and see what we come out of. You can do that. But the essence of creativity, I think, is curiosity. Without curiosity, you can't really be creative. So what does curiosity do? It drives us to, like I said, question everything, to reach out, to be very motivated to learn new things. It's a stimulus, obviously, so it's a good stimulus. So if you're curious, I think most people who are in the creative professions who do move up the ladder are just instinctively curious about things. So there's this thirst to learn, thirst to be hungry, thirst to learn new things, and these new things that we learn along the way maybe aren't related at all. You know, there's this subject and that subject and that one. Maybe none of them have anything to do with each other. But as you go through life, you bring those 3, whatever, 10, whatever points of interest together, and they all, so we call it cross-industry innovation. You sort of bring different viewpoints to find a new solution to a problem that, if you weren't searching outside of your comfort zone, you would just have a one-track mind with one solution, and it's the way we've always done it. But the beauty of design is that there is actually no limits to you're paid to be a thinker. You're paid to be a guy who thinks, as they say, out of the box. So you might seem a bit like the crazy person of the company, but that's what everybody needs is crazy people to get those ideas up and running, or at least a spark of imagination, because that's, you know, Einstein said that. I think it was creativity is more important than intelligence, or something like that, where you would think intelligence was actually more important, but he put it on a second level, and it was that the creative side has to come first, or is actually the driving force, because without that initial great idea, there's nothing to make work that will actually improve. So you need that curiosity that leads to creativity. Then you're working with your engineers who hopefully are that type of thinker also, where they're inspired to take a new approach or a new direction. And oftentimes you find that from outside our own profession. That's why a lot of companies go outside of their typical design sources and try to find inspiration or leads from the way designers from other professions would look at it. And if you do that, the results can be incredibly successful, incredibly inspiring, incredibly different. And it's a good source of inspiration for the other designers at the same time. So I've always kind of relied on that. Just growing up, obviously, in a world which is a little bit, like so many ingredients making it that you can't just say you're a one-track mind guy. Designers, of course, shouldn't be stereotyped. It gets to be a little bit boring if you're a specialist in one thing. And all of us, obviously, we don't want to just be master of all, expert in all trades, but a master of none of them or something like that. But you don't want to get spread too thin. But the more knowledge you have outside of your own field, the more that's going to benefit the field that you're trying to work inside of it. So again, that's what I've always tried to do all my life, is to just learn, everything about everything, kind of, and then see how I can bring those influences and that knowledge back into my own design projects in a way that I can look at it from a different angle than what is normally looked at.
I think this idea of multidisciplinary working is just so powerful. I think, and once you've worked in that environment, you never go back. I mean, for me, it's a privilege to come to work every day because I'm surrounded by designers and researchers and strategists and physicists and scientists and engineers. And, when you mix all of those mindsets up in the room and then extrapolate that by the number of experiences they've all had, it's mind-blowing. I went to a seminar by a professor of neuroscience a few years ago, and he was trying to expel the myth that you're kind of born creative. And he said, if you have this kind of sense of curiosity about you and you just go and live life and just suck it all in, your brain will bubble away and make the connections as you're faced with new problems, make those combinations.
Exactly. I firmly believe that. I don't know who said that, but whoever said that, we're thinking similarly. Yeah, that's good.
So listen, I feel like I've kind of wandered away from car design for a few minutes, which some of our viewers are going to be, devastated about. But I mean, I think it's super important to talk about things like creativity. But many of the listeners may be interested to know where your kind of love affair with cars began. And you were the subject of a brilliant Lionsgate documentary that came out last year called Chasing Perfect. And I mean, as well as containing enough beautiful cars to put a big smile on any car lover's face, I also found it had some very moving moments in it. And I recall you first setting eyes on a very particular car as a child.
Sure. That probably is the first moment I thought I wanted to be a designer, or not actually be a designer, but to fall in love with a mechanical object. I guess that was the first moment. I didn't know that cars were actually designed by people until I was probably in my early 20s. That might shock a few people, but for me, growing up in countries that had very little to do with the automotive culture, I wasn't in sunny Southern California where all the hot rod dragsters kind of were created in custom paint jobs, or in the beauty of Motor Valley in Italy where all the supercar manufacturers are there. I had no contacts with those until I actually started learning car design. But my history in car design, probably, I mean, in Africa, in Morocco, in Casablanca in the 60s, there weren't, once in a while you might see something exotic, but you wouldn't even know as a kid what it was. So it'd, go by you in a blur. But the one first car that ever stopped me in my tracks was on March 19th, 1969. And I say that because it was that memorable for me that it never left my mind. I remember it now. It's in the morning, walking hand in hand with my father on a boulevard, Rue Mohammed V in Casablanca. And there was a Jaguar E-Type, and it was just parked on the side there, on the side of the road. And it just, it's one of those things where I just froze, walked up to it, started touching it. and I was in awe that a car could, have that kind of emotional aura around it, that it would just capture me as a 10-year-old child, and not allow me to move on. I was kind of like, frozen in the deer in the headlights kind of moment, where you're just, in a good way, just looking at something that you're wondering, what is this? And obviously later I learned more about the car itself and things like that, because I had no idea what it was. I just knew it was a stunning car. But it took my father a lot of effort to get me to finally, after 10 minutes or 15 minutes, I can't remember how, to finally say, come on, we have to get going. But that moment has stuck with me forever, and it's as clear today as it was when I first saw it many years ago. But that was my first impression, that a mechanical object could cause me to get that kind of reaction and goosebumps and pleasure and everything. So
and that reaction, I mean, you described it as an aura there. It is implicitly multi-sensory, and I mean, your dad actually went on to create a car dealership, I think, and you work there in various ways, including in the paint shop. And I'm interested to know what you learned from that very physical proximity to the cars, their surfaces, their smells, the materials, being so close to them. Did you develop a sort of empathy with it that went way beyond the sort of almost the physical?
Yeah, it certainly did, Ben. I wanted to actually create that kind of sculpture. For me, it wasn't a car; it was more of a work of art, and it was metal, and it was created. It didn't grow out of the earth. It wasn't an animal. It was actually a physical object, and that love. Because, I mean, I easily could have gone into the mechanical side of cars. I mean, cars attract me for what they are completely, but there was something about the artistic side and the visual side of the automobile that grabbed me right from that moment on. And I guess it's like when we speak about love and the five senses, this Jaguar had everything that made all those five. I mean, I could smell the car, I can almost remember that it had this oily, sort of just parked smell, of an old car. It wasn't old, but it had that kind of mechanical smell to it. And everything, it was ticking when you shut off an engine. It had that tick, 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 cooling down process. So there was, it was just something where you think, I want to marry this car if I can. And so that emotional stimuli that I got from that car was rooted right into me, probably before that, but it needed some object to create that feeling in me. So I fell in love at that very moment, and with a mechanical object, and it never left me. It's kind of like the girl that got away, in a certain sense, but it was always in the back of my mind. But still, what I realized was, what's important in life is if you want to get somebody to love what you do, you have to attach an emotional connection to that design. Because people will buy products and they will use them, but they won't have an emotional connection. So it's not the same thing. Cars typically have that combination of sensory feel to them that they can cause people to become very possessive of their cars. I fear that the more we go away from that mechanical essence of a vehicle and the more sterilized they become in the future, we're going to lose a little bit of that passion that we had growing up as kids for having these cars on our bedroom walls, posters and things. And so there's going to be a transition in the future, I would expect, of kids becoming more passionate about other things than cars, and that's all right. That's the way the world works. We're not as passionate today as kids about horses as kids were probably in the 1800s or something.
So it's the thing with that idea of connection. I mean, and maybe I'd swap in another word, which is empathy. I don't know if that's a sort of replacement word for that, but I like this idea of kind of developing empathy with what's fundamentally an inanimate object. How as as designers, our job is to systematically create great designs. People don't pay us to create a one-hit wonder. Our job is to be systematically successful time after time. How do you achieve this idea of kind of empathy, multisensory success time after time?
A lot of it would probably come down to biomimicry, the influence of the design from nature. So it's kind of hard to make somebody fall in love with a product that fall in love, because you can still like a product and you can still, feel proud that you own it and everything. But the products that really help you to connect with are products that typically are soothing almost in a way, to look at. You don't want, so in nature, there are a lot of products, or not products, there are a lot of organisms that are just cuddly, for example, puppies, for example. I don't know, the closest thing you can relate to in the sense of that. There's an attraction in nature that just feels natural. So the more we can sort of lean towards that direction, you're going to start getting that kind of influence in your design. And it's not often, it's not always that you want that feeling in a car. For example, you don't want a cuddly sports car, right? Or something that looks like something you just want to walk up and, and hug and things like that. Sports cars, for example, do have to have an edge to them. But there's enough inspiration in nature to animals that have an edge to them that when you look at them, they look right. Scorpions look right, for some reason. Centipedes look right. Bumblebees might look right too. But there's sort of a menace to them also at the same time. They're designed to be, give that edgy look to them. So if you're looking to design something that has that sort of edgy look to them, then you might look at nature as to how a shark looks, dramatically, I wouldn't say vicious, but dangerous in a way. And you can take that, but that's a natural direction for the design to go in. Whereas if you start doing things like the latest Cybertruck from Tesla, it's, for me, about as confusing a design. I don't know if you've seen it, Ben, but this new Cybertruck from Tesla, whether it's a joke or it's serious, no, I don't think anybody except them, maybe Elon might know, but if it's a serious idea. But for me, it's just something they threw out to challenge our design.
So let's run with that idea. Whichever side of the fence it falls, provocative or serious. I think there's often an interesting sort of nuance of being a designer where you're kind of pushing at the boundaries a little bit. And, I'm not saying physics changes, physics is physics, but you're constantly in that tension of, well, can we do it? And how far can we push the envelope? And sometimes there's pushback. And, as a designer, how far do you know when to push and when is the time to concede? Because it is a team effort. Nothing gets to market without the team making that happen. Where's that sort of subtle ground to tread, to push the horizon, but ultimately know where to concede to get something to market on time?
Well, a lot of factors come into there then, because, for example, you can push so hard that the product doesn't even look, when it comes out, like it belongs to the company that actually has been producing that product before. You lose the design language or the brand recognition factor. So you always, I think it's important, unless the company's done really bad and has really gone down a terrible path. You don't want to break away, from the brand look. So, but then again, people say, well, how do you know what's coming out in 5 years? Or how do you know what the future is going to bring, or what the public is going to like in the future? You really, as a designer, don't really have to listen to that. You only have to design something as a designer, something that costs less to build, if possible, than the last product you designed. And that doesn't mean it's going to be cheaper. It's actually probably going to be more expensive to design something that is cheaper to build, because you're looking at techniques in manufacturing that are probably more expensive to allow you to build it in less pieces, for example. At the same time, it's hard for us to say what people in the future are going to want or like, but I think it's up to the designer to lead the customer down that route. So it's not like we know what's coming out in 5 years. It might be, if you're doing a product that's only a year or 2 years out. And likewise, it's hard to say what the customer is going to want. But that's not your way of thinking. You're designing, obviously not for yourself, because that's a little bit, irresponsible as a designer, but you're looking at certain elements that will make something a better product, which is simpler to build, perhaps, like I said, costs less to build, improves the quality, reduces complexity perhaps of the product, introduces new materials. Those kind of concerns will actually make the product look more futuristic anyways, you know? So it's not trying to design something to look more futuristic. It's designing it to be more futuristic, and in making it more futuristic, being more futuristic, it's gonna look different. So that's the natural evolution of how nature works. Nature doesn't design something to look better or look different. It just improves it along the way. So if you can implement that kind of strategy to your design, where the product in all its functions and all its needs and things is actually an improvement over where you were before, and still contains a little bit of that emotional DNA, as we call it, sort of that family feeling, then you're moving the product along, and you have a story built up that you can tell the customer when the product comes out that the product looks like this because we've improved that, we've improved that, we've improved that, and this is the result. So,
and thinking about this idea of products that look a bit different. I mean, you know, we talked about sort of unusual connections earlier on, and making the sort of disruptive links, and you know, sometimes that comes about by unusual partnerships, and I think something that looks different and came about by an unusual partnership is your recent work, which is a product for babies but working with a defense contractor.
Sure.
I mean, you know, on the surface of it that seems like a bonkers combination, but I mean, tell us how that somehow worked.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's Baby Ark, and that is destined to come out very soon as the world's safest infant baby car seat. So when you put your most prized possession, as we call it, into a vehicle, you're putting them into potentially a harmful situation, and you will want, obviously, the safest device or method of keeping them safe during that journey. So what's funny is that in the world, or not funny, it's actually painful to know that in the world of infant car seat technology, there's been in the US no new advancement since 1970 in the technology, and in Europe since 2000. So in other words, if you design or use the technology in the States of a seat designed in 1970, that seat is approved for use today. And that is just mind-blowing in the sense that with all the new technology that has been discovered in terms of safety and materials and all this energy impact devices, there's been no new things brought to the market that keep in sync or are relevant today. So the idea was, if we can take the most modern system of energy absorption available on the planet and basically almost shrink it down in such a way that you can bring it to use in the civilian market. One of the most common products we have in society, besides food, if you call that a product, is infants, or, you know, your children. We're constantly, you know, having children, and that's not going to stop as long as we're on this earth. So one of the things that we can design that brings incredible responsibility and satisfaction, if you get it right, is things that, like I said, in safety, protect our prized possessions. So it made sense to take this device that was used is used currently in the best armored vehicles in the world in critical situations or catastrophic situations, and bring that technology to the infant car seat market. So that's what I've done with Baby Ark and a company called Mobius, who's responsible for it. And they came to me and asked me if, from a design point of view, do I see connections between designing supercars and what we could bring out as a design for this new seat. And obviously there are a lot of technologies that are introduced in the high-end hypercar, supercar market that are not just for show. They're actually new tech that at some point, obviously very expensive, but at some point as they mass produce it, it'll trickle down into everyday cars. So there is a reason why we have hypercars and supercars. If anybody's saying, why do you do cars, design cars that very few people can own? Well, we're actually using them as product development almost in a certain way. And eventually that technology, like I said, does come down and help the volume market. So it has to start somewhere. But again, the baby seat is reaching a heck of a lot more people. And that is what we call soul satisfying, when you know that the design you're doing can really, really help society. So in a nutshell, what it is, or in an eggshell actually, because it's the design is pretty much, again, it's innovative, it's bringing something new to the market, obviously in the sense of innovation and technology, and we want it to be the best of the best. And it's using biomimicry, obviously, it's sustainability design, so we're looking at the environment and we're using the different materials. But a seat like this has been has been too long in the coming, I think.
I love this idea of stuff coming from, a small number, a cutting edge, and filtering down ultimately to the mainstream. It's the way of things, and a very powerful way of bringing the future closer.
Yeah, I mean, we all fall in love with supercars because they are attractive. I mean, different tastes for different, different strokes for different folks, but everybody's taste can be different. But this is the seat that's coming to the market. Not that it'll look like a hypercar, a supercar, but it will bring in elements of design that we have learned from other industries that do benefit those products, and will benefit this product in a way that's unheard of, or had never been thought of or considered. And suddenly we're jumping almost up to a 70% improvement level over the current seat technology, baby seat technology.
So we've talked about kind of improving product, but the other thing, and I'm very conscious that we're going to be out of time before we know it. One of the things I wanted to ask you about was not just about sort of how we can improve and enhance cutting edge product, but also process. And what comes to mind is one of my previous webinar guests was Professor Shafi Ahmed, who's a pioneering surgeon, and he was involved in the setup of the Nightingale Hospital in Excel in London. So, I mean, in 2 weeks they built a hospital. I mean, something that would ordinarily take years. And the resonant theme that struck with me was that you'd kind of gone through your own almost crazy design experience with the BMW X5, the original one, where you were given this crazy brief, where you had to achieve this thing. And maybe you just want to sort of recount the story just quickly for the listeners in a sec, where you had a tiny amount of time to achieve the impossible, but you just had to do it. And I was wondering how many of the lessons that you learned where the seemingly impossible, there wasn't a blueprint, there wasn't an instruction manual, filtered down into the way that you work now. Because it strikes me that we're in a time of change, a time of crisis. There isn't a blueprint, but we've got to make the best of what we've got, and how we can take some of those lessons and kind of unpack them to face the coming months as we find them.
Yeah. Obviously, it's a risk, Ben, and you never know what's going to come out of it. But the first thing you have to realize when you take on something like this, a new project like this, is not to see the obstacles, but the opportunities. I think every project you ever will do in your life will have any number of obstacles preventing you to get to an easy, excellent solution. No project you do, no matter how much time you have, is easy. If you want to make it the best, there's always going to be something standing in your way that you think, how are we going to solve this? So you might as well accept it from the start and not say, well, we really don't think we can do it because of this obstacle. You will find a way to get around that obstacle. So you should spend more of your energy and creativity in knowing that you're going to have these obstacles, but let's just find a way to do it. So it's all about positivity in approaching a project. There's so much negativity oftentimes in teams and people resisting the flow. There are impossible things obviously in any project to do, but you have smart people on these projects that understand those limitations. And as long as you don't, let things go out of control, you can find solutions for just about anything. So I think what I learned, especially from the X5 project, which you mentioned, done in record time, it was designed in 2 hours on a plane flight, which sounds stupid because people say, oh, on a plane flight, that's what all designers say. I literally had 2 hours from Munich to Turin on a Sunday to design a car that would start on Monday, the next day, to be actually built in 3D in 6 weeks. And that is normally a 6-month process of sketching, and then probably another 6 months of actually building the product. So how do you compress that down into 2 hours of design and 6 weeks? Well, you work with good people, obviously, for the 3D construction, and you go with your gut instinct as a person who's educated and experienced in what he's doing, to produce something that, okay, you don't want to stretch too far because you don't want to make it absolutely impossible to build. I mean, it has to follow certain ergonomic requirements and safety and certification, homologation. Everything has to be considered. But within 2 hours, if you're not going to find the solution then, you're probably never going to find it because you just don't want to find it. So, of course, you are limiting the amount of choices you have in what the product's going to look like. If you just do one proposal, you know, there's a myriad of proposals you can generate in 6 months and you can choose. But sometimes it's better to spend most of your refinement time on one idea rather than searching ideas. I've always said one good idea is better than 100 not so good ideas. So if you can just hone that one idea to perfection and with enthusiasm and passion and a great team, then you're generally going to come out with something that is very good. And that's what happened. We approached the project with knowing that that was our time limitation. It had never been done before, but that didn't mean that we couldn't do it. Who's to say that we can't run a 9-second, 100-meter, sprint? And it hasn't been done before, but somebody's going to come along at some point. Look, recently this year we had a guy run an under 2-hour marathon. Of course, he used technology and advancements, but it was under 2 hours, and he ran under his own power. He optimized the process. He didn't say he couldn't do it. He just said, okay, I'm going to do it, and this is what I need, and I will do it. Okay, 20 years from now, it might be done without that kind of technology. We'll know more about nutrition, about training, and those things will come in and become as important or more important than what we have today, with pretty high level anyways. But in the design process, when people say you did that in an incredibly short time, that's only relative to what we accept as normal. Doesn't mean it couldn't even be done faster than that. And risk is, like I said, companies hate risk. Big companies really hate risk because it's, the amount of money involved. But no risk, no gain, no pain, no gain. You have to push your limits to go to the next level. And so, again, there's that positivity factor, and the one bad apple that can destroy the company. You get one person on the team that sort of generates this negativity inside the team that can really bring down the whole team. So I try to avoid bringing people in with a negative thought pattern, I think. But if you have a good team and you're all positive about the project and you look at it from, we know it has to be done and we can get it done, let's just work together, put all our forces together and we will achieve it. You don't accept halfway solutions. You don't accept limitations. You do it. It's,
I think talking about team is a great time to check in with Pete from Live Illustration for the last time. Maybe, Pete, we've thrown a huge amount at you over the last half an hour or so. I wonder if you could pick out a couple of highlights for us.
Okay, hello. Yeah, it's been a real pleasure listening to you. So thank you. It's been really, really fascinating. So maybe I'll just highlight this bit in the bottom right of my drawing where it says that most multidisciplinary working leads to great things. And there's a whole thread of some of the points that I've tried to sort of cluster around that. So art and science will blend further in design. Talking about you can make great things which you can love. I think the point was between love and empathy. And then this slightly critical point about maybe in the future with sterile designs for cars, people won't be so in love with them. I found that really interesting. So there's a picture of the Tesla tank down there. So yeah.
Thanks ever so much, Pete. Yeah, I think the pleasure of driving in the future is a great challenge for all designers. Frank, my final question, because we're coming up on the hour. We're all experiencing the repercussions of this pandemic in very, very personal ways, thinking about priorities, behaviors, family, vulnerable loved ones, and for some, those who've been lost. And it all makes me feel very human. It makes me think about legacy, and that might sound a bit morbid. I don't mean it to sound in that way, but when you think about all the areas you've applied your skill, your vision, your energy, what does legacy mean to you?
Yeah, it's a word we throw around a lot. Like you should lead your life in a way that you want to leave a legacy behind you, and some of us get a chance to be in a position more so than others who do have a chance to do something that does have an impact in some way. But whether that impact affects or helps one person or helps 100 people or 1,000,000 people. It's the mindset that we should all have, that we want to do something to sort of give back to the thanks that we are allowed to be living, on this earth. Nobody wants to die. Everybody wants to sort of contribute or should want to contribute something to their presence or their time here on earth. It's a gift. We're gifted with life, and the best thing you can do to repay that, not that you have to repay it, but it's actually to feel like you've lived a life where you've given back something, I think. So legacy to me means using whatever I've been given as a talent or what I can recognize as something that I'm adept at doing or have a skill for, and pushing that skill to the maximum that I can actually do it, because we're not all born gifted, but we can actually become better at whatever we want to be just by doing it more and being curious, pushing that curiosity level to the max such that it reflects in our work. So in terms of leaving a legacy, I don't think it's important how many people's lives we touch, but that we actually do have that mindset that whatever we do in life gives back in a certain way. So I'm lucky to be in the design profession. The creative people are lucky because they can affect the lives of many, and creative people in the film industry or in writing or in creating products. We all have that precious gift that we can actually affect quite a few lives. But again, it's not about, reaching a mass amount of people. It's just everybody. I think for a good life, you have to touch somebody else's life in a way that makes sense, that they're lucky that you were there. You were there for them. You provided something good for them at the moment they needed it, and you've enriched somebody else's life. It's more about that than enriching your own life. That is a little bit too personal, maybe. But as long as we can reach out, help others, then that's the importance of feeling like you've actually created a legacy for yourself.
Thank you. I think that's a very positive point to end on. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry to say that our hour with Frank Stephenson is up. Frank, thank you for sharing such inspirational insight into your work and your vision for the role that design must play in contributing to a world and a society that is better prepared for times like this, and in particular for sharing some very personal experience on, I guess, resilience in the face of adversity.
Thank you.
A huge thank you to you all for joining us from so many different parts of the world. If you joined the webinar late or would like to enjoy Frank's discussion again at a later date, a recording will be made available on the Global Innovation Forum YouTube channel over the next day or so. Please don't forget, Frank has also got a mini-series called How I Designed, which is also available on YouTube. If this was your first What's Next webinar, I would encourage you to dive into the GIFLondon channel. It is a treasure trove of insights from inspirational speakers, both from the last few weeks and indeed from conference events over recent years on literally every innovation topic you could possibly wish for. Regular updates about new events, including the November conference, which we're all hoping will happen in some shape or form, will also be posted on the GIFLondon LinkedIn homepage. Until then, be resilient, stay positive, please look after each other, and please keep on innovating. Thank you.